today we are going to continue with chapter 9. Alright, so we are going to learn about graphical user interface, or as a short form is GUI. Okay, so um, actually, what is GUI? Okay, GUI will help you to actually to help the user to communicate with the system. Okay, we have for example like this. Okay, user will be able to enter their name, and then make their choice. Okay, and then choose from the drop down list, something like that. This is what we call as GUI. Okay, it allows the interaction between the user and the system. Okay, so in GUI components, you have to remember 5 things when you are creating your GUI. Okay, your GUI must be able to do all these things. Okay, first, it must have the ability to view inputs and outputs simultaneously, and then it must have one graphical window, and then it can input values in any order, like for example like this. User will be able to include their name in the text field, and then change the input values in windows such like this. They can change, they can choose, and then click buttons to get the output. For example like this one, the user will be able to click the button to get the output. Okay, these are main components when you are designing your GUI. Okay, so for Java GUI components, okay, so for Java GUI components, there should be two components, two different two main things that you have to remember. First, the containers. Okay, and then second one is the components. Okay, container consists of the frame which is the top level container here, and then the panel, okay, which are the partitions. Okay, here you can see there are two panel in this GUI, and then also the components is the small little things inside the panel, which is the label, the text field, and the buttons. Okay, so when you are creating your GUI objects, okay, it's actually you are trying to visualize what your system has to offer, right? So you can use all this that already provided in the Java Swing, and also there are several Java API that you can use to create GUI. For example, AWT and Java Swing. Okay, these are the example. For example, if you want to create a button, you can just use JButton, JBT. Okay, new button. Okay, and then example how can you create label, and the example how you can create the text field, etc. There's a lot of example you can refer online too. Okay, so these nothing much, is just the Swing GUI components. Okay, it shows here where each component referring to. Okay, for example, the J button, the J toggle button, checkbox, etc. are included in the abstract buttons, and then the editor pane, text field, text area, and then the password field are included in the JText component, etc. All right, and then let's move on with frame. Okay, if you refer here, frame located like it's like a frame. Okay, it's the outside outside part of your GUI. Okay, the formal definition is the frame is a window that is not contained inside another window. So for example, when you create one pop-up window, that call is as a one frame. If you have two pop-up windows, two frames. Okay, so frame is the basics to contain other user interface components in Java GUI applications. Okay, when you are trying to create frames, you can use the JFrame class. Okay, and then for Swing GUI programs, use JFrame class to create the windows. Okay, this is the frames, and then we call it as one windows. Oh, some typing error here. It's okay, can ignore that. Okay, now the windows. Okay, how can we create the windows? We can create the windows using the frame object. Okay, so the class frame provide various methods to control the attribute of the windows. Okay, it's up to you. It's up to you when you are designing your GUI. It's up to you how you want your user to communicate. Okay, and then the windows will be measured in pixels of height and width. Okay, you can create how big or how small the windows of your GUI based on your personal preference. And then the attributes associated with windows are title, the width, and the height. So the GUI window instance create as instance of the frame. Okay, it provide various method to control the Windows attributes. Okay, like we saw earlier, this is the frames. Okay, but the overall, including the overall thing, we call it as a window. That's why we call it as a pop-up window. All right. So these are methods provided by the class JFrame. Okay, you can go through on your own. Okay, it has the public JFrame, JFrame string s, etc. How you can set the size here and then set the title. Okay, so there are two ways to create a window. Okay, for the first approach, you have to first declare the object of the type JFrame, and then you instantiate the object, and then you use various methods to manipulate the windows. And then the second approach, you create a class containing application program by extending the definition of class JFrame and utilize mechanism of inheritance. Okay, for this first approach, actually, for example, you create multiple windows. Okay, it's like no connection between each windows or GUI that you created. But this one, you use the inheritance mechanism that we have learned in our previous chapters. Okay, you create a class that already have the application program, and then you extend the definition of the class JFrame. Okay, so these are the example of how can you use the Java Swing to create frame. Okay, these are the example. Okay, you can try this code if you want to see if it's working or not. And then now it's about the content pane. Okay, so the content pane is actually the inner area of the GUI window below the title bar inside the border. So all of these, the frame here is the title. Okay, is not included in the content pane. All of this, okay, this label, the text field, okay, these are all included as the content pane. Okay, to access content pane, first we have to declare the reference variable of type container, and we use method get content pane of class JFrame. Okay, these are the methods provided by the class container. Okay, and then now moving on to the label. Okay, how can we use label? Okay, what is label actually? Labels is the object of the particular class type. For example, here, the word counter here is the label for this specific text field. Okay, so to create this label, you have to use the class JLabel. Okay, the attributes for JLabel are title, the width, and the height. Okay, to create the label, you have to instantiate the object of the type JLabel. Okay, and then you modify the attributes to control the display of the labels. Okay, this for example here you want the how you want you can modify. Okay, you can modify how you want to display the labels. Okay, all right, these are the methods provided by the class JLabels. Okay, for your reference. And then moving on to the next component is the text field. Okay, text field is the object that belonging to class JTextField. Okay, in this example, here is the text field. Okay, to create the text field, we have to declare the reference variable of types JTextField and then instantiate the object. And these are the example of the methods for JTextField. And then for the J button, okay, these are the button. Okay, button count. You can change the button name. All right, so to create the button, you use the same technique that is used to create the JLabel and the JTextField that you see in the previous slides. All right, now let's move on to the event-driven programming. Okay, event-driven programming, actually we learned about how can the user actually communicate and get the feedback from the system. Okay, so procedure programming we already know. Okay, like you already learned before in the programming technique. Okay, in the C programming, right, procedure programming, you have one whole code in one file. Okay, and it is executed in a procedural order. All right, in event programming, the code is executed upon activation of the event. The activation of the event here, it can be by clicking. When user click, that means there's an event. The event here is button click. That's the event that happening. That is what and then the system give the output. That's what we call event driven programming. The diagram to show the overview of how event driven programming works. Okay, for example, the user will trigger the source by clicking a mouse, clicking button on your GUI, and then the source will invoke the listener, which are the event handler, and with the event object that will try to give the output what has been requested by the user. For example, the easy situation for you to understand the event driven programming. Okay, so action event. Okay, action event. An event will be created when the J button is clicked. All right, and then for the event listener, an object that receive a message when the button is clicked. All right, and then in Java you must register the listener. Okay, first, let's see what is the class action listener. Okay, the class action listener, like here, this is the listener where the event listener, the action listener is happening. Okay, for the class action listener, okay, it handles the action event. The action event, like the mouse clicking, is one example of the action event. And it also part of the package we call as java.awt.event. Okay, when you want to use this, you have to declare this package in your program. And then the class action listener is a special type of class. Okay, it's the interface. Okay, like we learned in our previous chapter 8. What is interface? Okay, interface that contain all the abstract method. Okay, so that is where the action that's how the action listener works too. Okay, and then it must contain the action perform method. Okay, if you want, you have to include the action perform method in your action listener class. All right, a listener class is designed specifically to create a listener object for a GUI component. Okay, for example, the button. All right, so it will not be shared by other application. So it is appropriate to define the listener class inside the frame class as under inner class. And then for inner class, okay, inner class actually is a class, is a member of another class. Okay, it's like a class inside class. All right, so the advantage of having inner class when you are creating a event driven programming that involves GUI, you can use an inner class to make the program simple. Okay, because when you use inner class, you can reference the data and methods that are defined outside of the class, and then you do not need to pass the reference to the outer class to the constructor of the inner class. Okay, you can just simply refer the data and the methods. Okay, and also inner class can be declared public, protected, and private. Okay, it depends on the it will subject to the same visibility like how you declare your classes before. That is how the visibility rules applied here to the member of the class. Okay, and then inner class can also be declared as static. Okay, a static inner class can be accessed using the outer class name, and it cannot access non-static members of the outer class. So what we have learned in this chapter, okay, these are the recaps what we have learned in this chapter. Okay, now we know that every GUI contains a window. All right, and various components are added to the content pane of a window. Okay, it depends on how you are designing the your window, your GUI. Okay, you can just include everything in one window. It's up to you how you are designing your GUI. Okay, and then the class frame is used to create windows. All right, and JLabel is used to label GUI components and display information to user. Okay, without the label your GUI will be very confusing. Okay, your user will not know what kind of input that they need to put in that specific field. Okay, and then text field is used for input and output, and button generates the action events, and then the action event is sent to the action listener as we see in the diagram earlier, and the action listener must have the method that called as action perform. Okay, that's all for chapter 9 GUI.